Before becoming the most feared dictator of the 20th century, Adolf Hitler was just an Austrian child surrounded by domestic violence, school frustrations, and destroyed dreams. This episode reveals how the silent trauma of childhood shaped the mind that would plunge the world into darkness. Adolf Hitler was not born monster. Behind the historical figure that plunged the world into a devastating war and the horror of the Holocaust, there was a boy marked by deep trauma and experiences that shaped his dark personality. This video reveals Hitler's childhood, seeking to understand the psychological roots that transformed him in the figure we all know, a dictator who personified the absolute evil of the 20th century. Born in Braunau am Inn, Austria in 1889, Adolf was the fourth of the 6 sons of Alois Hitler and Clara Pölzl. His father was an austere and authoritarian civil servant, known for his harsh and violent nature. His mother, on the other hand, was a sweet and devoted figure, creating a polarized family environment where fear and love coexisted in constant tensions. From an early age, Hitler lived with the weight of his father's overwhelming authority, who did not hesitate to use severe physical punishment. Their relationship was marked by severe criticism and humiliation, creating an environment of constant insecurity and fear for young Adolf. At the same time, Clara had almost suffocating protection, intensifying the boy's emotional dependence. This family dynamic was the stage where the first emotional wounds that accompanied Hitler for a lifetime began to draw. The emotional rigidity imposed by the mother and the idealized love of the mother created a divided personality. On the one hand, an insecure and sensitive boy. On the other hand, one figure who longed for power and recognition to compensate for his internal weaknesses. In adolescence, Hitler's dreams took shape. He wanted to be an artist. His talent for drawing was one of his few sources of pride. However, his way was abruptly blocked when, in 1907, his inscription for Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts was rejected, a devastating experience that marked his self-image and fueled deep resentment. Hitler could not accept failure. In his mind, he had not failed. The system was that it was corrupt, unfair, and dominated by interests that they conspired against it. This was the first clear manifestation of conspiracy thinking that would accompany him and deepen throughout his life. During this period, the life of young Hitler was marked by poverty, loneliness, and isolation. Living in homeless shelters, he developed an intense attachment to nationalist and racist ideals that offered a sense of belonging and superiority. Vienna, at the turn of the 20th century, was a cauldron of social, political, and ethnic tensions, and Hitler absorbed anti-Semitism that permeated the environment, which would shape the speech he would use to mobilize an entire nation. In 1914, with the outbreak of World War I, Hitler voluntarily enlisted in the German army. Military service provided him with a sense of identity, order, and purpose he had never encountered in childhood or in his youth. For Hitler, war was a transformative experience, but the German defeat in 1918 was a devastating emotional blow. He could not accept the surrender and saw in Germany's humiliation a reason to seek revenge and redemption. After the war, he joined the German Workers' Party, which would later become another party. His oratory ability, combined with accumulated resentment and conspiracy vision, attracted followers who sought a solution to the social and economic crisis of post-war Germany. Hitler began to develop his ideas based on racial superiority, virulent anti-Semitism, and the desire for ethnic and national purity. His ideas were not only political, but reflect a profound need for control and domination that masked their personal trauma and their aversion to vulnerability. The heyday of Hitler's trajectory was the rise to power in 1933. From there, his distorted worldview and unresolved traumas began to materialize in genocidal policies, brutal repression, and a war that would devastate the planet. Behind the facade of the charismatic leader, there was a mind marked by unique wounds. a psyche that used power to control internal fear and to make a fantasy of redemption and greatness. Inflamed discourses, hatred campaigns, and Holocaust are external manifestations of a deep internal struggle, where the pain of rejection, fear of weakness, and the pursuit of identity were channeled to a destructive political project. Understanding Adolf Hitler's childhood and youth is essential to understanding how personal trauma can become collective monsters, and how psychology and history intertwine to explain events that have marked humanity forever. Psychological anatomy of a dictator. Long before war and hate speeches, Adolf Hitler was a boy with fear, neglected by a tyrannical father and suffocated by personal failures. This psychological analysis reveals how a sick mind has been shaped by trauma, repression, and delusions of greatness until it became the archetype of modern evil. Adolf Hitler was not just a tyrant. It was a complex psychological construction of trauma, delusions, and disorders that together created one of the greatest monsters in history. In this script, we will dissect the layers of the Nazi leader's disturbed mind, exploring his psychopathology, personality disorders, addictions, and delusions that influenced his decisions and behaviors. Since childhood, Hitler has shown signs that today would be interpreted as indicators of psychological disorders. The emotional rigidity imposed by the violent father, the mother's excessive attachment, and early rejection shaped a personality marked by deep insecurities and the desperate need for control. The first and most evident psychological trait is extreme narcissism. Hitler had a constant need to be admired and feared failure and rejection. This explains the intensity with which he reacted to the rejection of the Academy of Fine Arts and how he built a narrative in which he would be a conspiracy victim. This narcissism is accompanied by paranoid traits, evident in his conspiracy theories against Jews, communists, and other groups he considered enemies. Hitler's mind worked in a Manichaean pattern, where the world was divided between friends and enemies, pure and unclean, correct and wrong, with no room for nuances or doubts. In addition, it displayed characteristics of a borderline personality disorder, with emotional instability, intense anger, and a polarized worldview. His inflamed discourses and emotional manipulation ability are indicative of this instability. Another fundamental element is the messianic delirium. Hitler saw himself as a chosen, a savior of Germany. This belief was so strong that it justified, for him, acts of extreme violence and genocide. Delirium is not just a religious belief, but a psychological construction that protects ego and legitimizes terrible actions. Finally, the lack of empathy is a striking feature. Hitler demonstrated an emotional disconnection with the suffering of others, treating people as instruments for their goals. This functional psychopathy was essential for the execution of its mass extermination plans. When we look at Hitler's mind, we see a complex picture where multiple disorders coexist, feeding each other and creating a highly dysfunctional personality. His traumatic childhood does not explain everything, but offers a key to understanding his psychology. This understanding is not intended to excuse your crimes, but to alert to the dangers of unresolved trauma, the emotional rigidity, and the destructive power of a wounded mind that refuses to seek help or accept vulnerabilities. Hitler is the extreme example of how psychology and history intersect. He was not a supernatural monster, but a man who let his pain speak too high, with devastating consequences for the whole world.